Disclaimer, this video is for educational and harm reduction purposes only, and I do not endorse the use of any illegal drug. Thank you. Hey guys, so this video is going to be a bit of a mishmash between education on what DMT is, how it works, and the general science behind it, as well as a trip report with my own personal experiences regarding the claimed supernatural experiences and elements to DMT, and finish up with a bit of a personal hypothesis on what I believe the connection between spirituality and DMT is. If you want my trip report and the religion stuff only, there'll be chapters that you can skip through. So what is DMT? DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine. It's one of two main parts in ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic drink used in a variety of spiritual healing and cultural practices. Usually, when used recreationally, DMT is vaporized after being suspended in oil or smoked in a purified crystal form. It's generally extracted from plants, often the Mimosa hostilis root bark, though it's contained in other plants as well. DMT is structurally very similar to psilocybin, the psychoactive compound of magic mushrooms, though in my personal experience has very different effects. However, DMT is different from other psychedelics like psilocybin or LSD in the fact that it naturally occurs in your body. We're not entirely sure where or how DMT is produced, however, it's been found in the pineal gland of rats, as well as the cerebral cortex and choroid plexus in humans. That being said, there is currently not enough research to suggest that the pineal gland produces DMT. On a simplified level, it's currently understood that naturally occurring DMT comes from the decarboxylation and other body processing of tryptamine, a common dietary amino acid. It's also suspected to play a role in development as well, as it can be found in much higher levels in the placenta, babies ranging from 12 to 17 days old, and in fetal samples. The highest concentration was actually found peripherally, predominantly in the lungs, and is hypothesized to move to the brain as opposed to being produced there. This was found in a study on rabbits specifically. So, what exactly does DMT do? Well, as stated before, DMT is a psychedelic. However, the amount consumed can make experiences vary widely. I won't be going too much into these different levels of effects, as I'll be discussing my own experience in a moment, but I will link a video below that goes into very heavy detail about the different levels of a DMT trip. So I'm going to give two trip reports, one for the breakthrough trip, and one what is basically what was kind of an almost breakthrough trip, which was the first one that I had. These sections won't be scripted, as I feel like I can't really convey them while writing it out first. So the first trip that I had, I was not sure if I wanted to do a breakthrough trip. I initially started out thinking I didn't, and then being like, okay, this is vibes, I'm gonna do that. And basically what I did was I sat in my living room and just stared at this nutcracker that we had in, that my mom gave us. It's a gay nutcracker, for Christmas. And initially my kind of feeling was mostly a body feeling where I don't really know how to describe it, but it was like relaxing euphoria. Like that feeling you get in your chest when you're excited, except it was over my whole body and more muted, but it was also like relaxing. I don't really know how to describe that well. I felt very calm, I guess, and almost very focused, which I'm not sure if it was because I was trying to have a breakthrough trip before I changed my mind, and that's why I was focused, or if it was just a result of the DMT. But initially I had very low level visuals, things like, for example, the door hinge looked like it was getting a little smaller, a little bigger. Colors were more vibrant, like we have this rainbow IKEA bag in the corner that was, once I went off of this trip, looked at it and realized and was like, oh, that looks really dull and sad in the dark room corner, but it almost looked like it was like lit up because it was so bright. And that was kind of the lower levels of that until I was like, okay, no, I'm going to try more. And, it was almost like there was a film, like, you know, whenever you get those holographic transparent things that like you laminate things with, like it was this kind of geometric overlay, but it wasn't like on top of it. It was interacting with the shapes in the room, which I don't really know how to describe. And it was mostly octagon kind of shaped. And I'm going to try and put I'm going to try and make a graphic that looks like it that I'll put over, because I don't really know how to describe it. But almost like this like shimmery, iridescent geometry over everything in the room that almost kind of looked like a dome too. Like it was the shape of the room, but also like a dome. I really don't know how to describe it. And there came a point where I feel like I almost got to the breakthrough trip, and I think if I had closed my eyes and probably taken another hit of it, I probably would have got there, but I just kind of had this feeling of like, I'm good now, so I didn't. But towards the end of that, the shapes were still there, but it looked like there was the outline of kind of a human-like shape inside of these, I I guess, like fractal kind of shapes that was like moving with it. Like it was sort of like how I said that the background, like the room that I was in, was affecting the way that the geometry moved, like as though there was something there to be affecting the way the geometry moved that was kind of in the shape of a person, but there was nothing there to actually be affecting it. And I did get this kind of feeling that a lot of people talk about, where it feels like it's its own and this was like different than actually seeing what they usually call entities, which is just something that it's a person, it's a whatever, a figure basically that feels like it has its own autonomy outside of kind of your own ability to control where the trip is going. And it feels like a person is in the room with you. I don't know how to describe that other than like, you know, when someone's standing behind you and you can't see them and they're not making any noise, but like you can feel that there's a person behind you, like that, like, you know that there is a person in front of you. And did not feel like it was a part of my own ability to control what that was doing, like in the same way that I could, to some level, kind of control how the trip was going. Like if I, you know, focused on something else or like looked at my phone, for example, it almost felt like the trip turned off if I looked at my phone. Like it wasn't doing that. It felt like it was its own thing, basically. And I started getting that bodily feeling very, very strongly, to the point where it kind of made me nauseous. So I stopped because I was like, I hate being nauseous. This is really cool. This is good enough for me. I'm done now. And the come down from DMT is very short. It's like 10 to 20 minutes. So I basically just went to my room, laid down. And in my room, like the getting up and moving and kind of removing my focus kind of turned it down a bit to where it was more low level visuals that were closer to what I experienced at the beginning of the trip, which was in between seeing the fractals and just the more vibrant colors and kind of breathing, which was almost like these little waves of, the best way I could describe it is like when people draw energy in between everything in the room. And I kind of went sort of back to that, but less vibrant, and then it fizzled out. And that was my first experience with the first trip. That was not a breakthrough. So before I do the second trip report, I want to explain, scripted again, what is a breakthrough trip. In short terms, it's when you feel separated from your physical body and surroundings. There may be degrees where you're able to focus on your surroundings or body and become aware of them if you focus really hard, but it's generally considered somewhat out of body. Breakthrough trips are usually done with closed eye, but you can also have open eye breakthrough trips as well. They're just less common. On a lower level of a breakthrough trip, opening your eyes may somewhat pull you out of the experience, and you may either return to the state you were in before, or experience just more intense closed eye visuals when closing your eyes again. Some people report not leaving their breakthrough when opening their eyes, but this seems to depend on the person as well as the amount taken. Not all breakthrough trips result in ego death either. Mine did not, but it is the point at which an ego death can happen. So I will move on to my experience with that as well. So I want to start out with the fact that I did more research on basically how to have a breakthrough trip between that first one and the second one. So I entirely, because closed eye versus open eye visuals are very different with DMT. So I pretty much started out with my eyes closed for the entire trip. I was like, I am not going to let it mess up, basically. So I did not really I had similar visuals with eyes closed, but more vibrant, I guess, and not interacting with my surroundings in the way that it was before. But I'm not going to go into that too much because that's not really, I already explained how that is. So we're going to just start off with where the breakthrough started, which was I had started to get nauseous, but I was like, no, fuck it. I don't care if I'm nauseous. I'm doing this. So I just put a trash bag over my chest, which sounds weird, but I promise is relevant. And basically just kept repeatedly hitting it. And I did start to get very, very intense closed eye visuals, mostly geometric and mostly blues, which I don't know if the color has any meaning at all or relevance, but it was mostly like light blues kind of colors. And I got to a point where those colors started shifting more darker. And realistically, I think this was because it was getting dark outside, but my eyes were closed and I was high, so I didn't realize that. But because of that, I basically started becoming a breakthrough trip whenever I realized there was like this black shape that started to kind of block the middle of my vision, as I got further into it, and as the colors around it got darker, that dark shape kind of took more of a, I don't really want to say human because it's like figure. Usually people who do DMT call it the entity, so I'm just going to call it that, even though that feels really cringy to me. I guess of the entity. And as it started to form less from a black splotch in my vision to a more defined, like clearly defined shape of a person, I started to get probably the most panicked I've ever felt in my entire life. Like, I cannot explain the level of, like, panic that I was feeling. And I couldn't really explain why either. There was not, like, I wasn't scared of it. Like, the entity, in quotations, was not scaring me. It was just the anxiety that came with it appearing. And one of the things with it is that you kind of have to go into it with this open mindset of, like, this is the experience that I am having, and I'm going to accept this experience, and I'm willing to take what it's going to give me. So I kind of, tried to basically re-ground myself and not get rid of it either. Like, I wanted it to stay there because I was interested in it. And I was like, I basically just, like, DBT'd myself, right? Like, I was like, I am not scared of this. You are there. I am there. We are both chilling. We're both fine. You're not doing anything to me. I'm not doing anything to me. We're having a good time together, basically, was me saying that. And it kind of started to change shapes. Not like in a change shape, like shape, just like it was already semi-defined. And then it kind of went back and forth from being less or more defined. And I don't know how to describe when it went away, but there was this feeling. And I also want to note, I was overheating at this point. My room gets really hot and I was extremely warm, but I did not want to move and take my shirt off. So I was overheating, and that's relevant because as soon as I kind of had just been like, I accept that this is what's happening and you don't want to hurt me, I don't want to hurt you, we're both chilling. And again, it had this same kind of feeling that I mentioned earlier of, like, this feels like its own autonomous person too, which is, I think, part of what freaked me out about it, that it felt so separated from me. Like, it did a lot of the other things that were very like, yeah, this is a trip. And that felt very like, no, this is real. And it kind of, again, turned back to I was no longer aware of where my physical body was. I mean, I try, actually, while I was in it, I tried to move to see if I could tell, because no one had really talked about that. And I could be aware of my body if I tried very hard. But, like, if I was not actively thinking about it, I was in, I don't know, it was like the fractals again, but it was almost like a beach, except it wasn't a beach. It was just like how the sky looks when you're at a beach. And this is really, really stupid, but it was a really cool part of the trip, is the trash bag stopped feeling like it was on my chest. And instead, because of the way it was laying, it felt like it had turned into wings on my arms. I do not know how to describe that, and it's so stupid that it was a trash bag. Like, I hate saying this part of it because it feels so dumb because it was a trash bag, but it physically felt like, instead of being a thing sitting on my physical body, that it was my body turning into this shape. Which again sounds so stupid, but it was really cool. And so I just kind of basically, what felt like the equivalent of floating around this, like, fractal sky. It really didn't look like a beach. I don't know how to describe it. It didn't look like a beach. It just had, like, the colors of a beach. It was very, like, bright colors. And I just kind of sat there and had fun with it. Honestly, I don't really remember super well what happened after that, other than, whenever it switched from the anxiety to, like, the anxiety basically turning off, it also felt like there was a breeze, like, that cooled me down, why I stopped being so hot. Which is, I don't know if that was a result of something in my house and my brain interpreted it that way or what, but it felt like I was no longer overheating and I had just been hit with, like, the coolest AC blowing on my face known to man. And just felt very, like, at peace, I guess. Like, I went from this, like, intense, the most anxiety I've ever felt in my life to, like nothingness in the most peaceful way. And then I kind of just chilled with it until it started to kind of fizzle out and go back to more kind of normal closed eye visuals. And yeah, that was the end of that. So that's the end of the trip report. Sorry, that was really long-winded, but it's just such a difficult thing to describe, and I also feel so cringy describing it too. But back to the scripted part. So did DMT change my beliefs? The short answer is no. I tend to hear a lot of pushback from Redditor-type psychonauts who think that if DMT didn't change your experience of religion and spirituality, then you didn't go into it with an open mind, you didn't take enough, or it's your subconscious telling you that you're supposed to be facing it and you didn't face it properly, otherwise you'd understand. I'll admit in both trips, it was quite hard for me to dismiss the "this is a chemical in my brain" mindset. But I'm very confident that during the second trip, I went in with a very open mind and willingness to basically listen, which is listen to what my brain was trying to tell me, listen to whatever, I felt like the entity was a real person, so treat it like a person, like an autonomous thing. Doing this is actually what I believe allowed me to have the breakthrough, as well as the almost sudden and dramatic release of anxiety and panic that I felt upon seeing the entity. However, while I did, during the trip experience, see what many people describe as the entities having their own autonomy and their own self, which is really a feeling I don't think I'm able to properly articulate, that this figure felt as much like its own person, its own autonomous person, as a real human. I think my own personal perception of religion and spirituality, even if I was not thinking about it in that moment, affected my interpretation of those experiences and feelings. I think ultimately, the reason so many atheists change their tune after DMT, as well as why so many already spiritual people become so confident, is because fundamentally what you are seeing is your own brain. I put a large amount of my waking hours into researching religion, to why people are religious, to the psychology behind indoctrination and the emotional responses about how people feel God and things like worship music or prayer or speaking in tongues. Even in my subconscious, it is a part of who I am to not only be skeptical, but flat out refuse to see anecdote as a reflection of truth. Many people are atheist by default, or don't think that much about it, or even wish that they could be religious but can't make themselves believe it, or just don't have that kind of immediate dismissal attitude that I have towards anecdote. This is not to say that it's better that I think this way by any means. I think I can be a bit too strict on what I consider to be valuable information, and I often do neglect the human element of these things in favor of what I think is factually true or what things we simply can't know. But it is to say that I spend a lot more time thinking about these things than a lot of other people do, and it's a lot more ingrained to not just my opinions, but the way I operate on a day-to-day level. So even having those experiences of seeing the entities or feeling like I was physically taken somewhere else, or the intense emotional feelings when I broke through or right before, I am able to look at those experiences and understand that, wow, brains are really incredible. My brain did that. There is so much more we have to learn about neuroscience, as opposed to understanding my own personal anecdote as evidence of something supernatural. And these experiences are really intense and really powerful, and I can imagine even more for someone who does experience ego death, that these types of experiences are also what fuels a lot of religious people without psychedelics. There's been studies showing how brains react to speaking in tongues, for example, that parallel that of certain drug use. So if something not under the influence can evoke such a dramatic emotional response, I completely see why, especially after experiencing it myself, why that anecdote is more than enough for some people. It feels undeniably real and not just on a visual level. But I personally cannot rationalize that as being anything beyond my brain being a brain. I think I was open-minded to the experience and the possibilities during the trip and before it, but looking back on it, my values and the things that I find to be important in proving something true or not are still in the same place that they were before. That's all I got today. Thanks for watching, guys. Ha det. The populace in prayer, I look at them talking